Very quickly.
I think start the recording.
Yeah, I'll start recording.
Okay. Sorry, did Peter say start or he say start the recording?
Yeah, you can start.
All right, I can start. Okay. Hello, my name is John, and I'm actually presenting from Sydney. I have wanted to make arrangements to visit Perth and be there in person. That won't be this month, so as early as next month or maybe the month after that, I will do a trip to Perth. So you will see me again in person, but oh, you can't see me right now. You can just hear my voice talking from the cloud. Um, I wanted to. There's several presentations I can do. I can talk about flow quite a lot, but today, when I was throwing a few ideas with Terry, Terry mentioned that why don't you talk about Flow Studio? Why did you make it? What's the backstory to it? So it's an interesting talk. I don't give this talk much, but it's a very interesting talk, and we will focus on the free features of Flow Studio. So Flow Studio is a freemium product. There is the free part that everybody could benefit, and I build it almost as a tool that I need. And you kind of get the idea as I talk about the story. And then there are some premium features. I won't talk about them much. So if you're interested in playing with Flow Studio and you're now interested in some of the premium features, you can reach out to me at the end. I have my contact, or you could just play with it and realize what it's doing and support this product. So let me go right into it. The best Flow Studio, this is very bold, the best Flow Studio features that will save us time. My name is John Liu. I'm based in Sydney. I'm a MVP in both Flow and SharePoint. So a long-time Office MVP as well as Flow. And I made Flow Studio. And I recently learned this technique. It's called summary zoom. It's so cool. Look at this. Ooh. So the story of Flow Studio, in 2017, I have too many flows. That is actually why I need Flow Studio. And when people ask me, John, why do you build Flow Studio? What is the pain you're trying to solve? I just look at them blankly and say, well, I have 100 flows. I can't find my flows. And people give me these weird looks. They're like, John, that's a very unique problem to you. Nobody else has that problem. Now, guess what? 2 years later, in 2019, everybody has this problem. If you're in kind of a admin position where people are sharing flows with you, or if you're more quite fluent with flow and people are sharing flows with you, or you're controlling a service account where flows are being shared and connected with you, you will generally have too many flows very quickly. Now, first step is I use Flow to solve my flow problem, right? Flow has this connector called the Flow Management Connector. You can use it to interrogate the Flow APIs themselves, and then say, so basically, in a very crazy way, you could use Flow to manage flows, right? You could use Flow to give you a whole list of all the flows that you have. And the very first version of Flow Studio is not a separate app. It's really just the Flow Management Connector on a scheduled job, scanning all my flows and pushing them all into my SharePoint list. And from SharePoint, I was then filtering, clicking on the link that will take me back to the flow and whatnot. So that's essentially the first version of Flow Studio. It was just Flow Management Connector plus a SharePoint list. Then very quickly, I realized a few more things. The Flow Management Connector doesn't have all the APIs I wanted. I want to go right into the owners. I want to go into the permissions. I want to go into custom connections. I want to go into the runs. So there's all these additional endpoints that are not on the Flow Management Connector. So I start to write wrappers around how I will call the extra connectors. So if you're familiar with Flow or if you're familiar with Logic apps, It's like imagine Microsoft gave you a connector that only reads the top one. Like if you think of the environments and then the flows, so the top two levels of objects, it doesn't go any deeper. It doesn't tell you the triggers. It doesn't tell you the runs. It doesn't go into the actions in the runs. So Flow Studio goes about 5 levels deeper than the flow management connectors. It reads one object and then it goes in and reads some more, and it goes in and reads some more. And then as I become awarded the Flow MVP, I realized that there are some features that are asked by the community, but it's not something that is that high value that the Flow team is tackling right away. So I started adding some features to Flow Studio that the team isn't working on. And this is a little bit of nerd warning because I'm a developer. I'm very geeky, extremely geeky. Flow Studio, I sell it as a power user app, but it's not actually an app to me. Flow Studio to me is an API host. It's a shell to call APIs on whatever I want or whatever we want, right? So that's really how I see it. Like when I see Flow Studio, it's, oh, there's a new API. Well, I know how to call that, and I have a place in the UI where I can put that feature. So that's how I see Flow Studio. But that's how a founder sees his baby, not necessarily how I would sell the baby. But anyway, why would I sell the baby anyway? Look at that summary zoom, so cool. Next part. So I wanted to show Flow Studio. If you have not seen Flow Studio is flowstudio.app. And when you connect, the first time you connect, it will ask you to sign in with your Microsoft account. If you authenticate, then it will ask a permission to read your flows. If you grant that, then it'll go ahead and read all this. Flow Studio is a browser application, so it's very similar to the Flow website in that this web app talks to the Flow APIs on your behalf. So Flow Studio is very much the same. It runs all completely in your browser, doesn't go through me. And this is the default flow. So I now have 483. When I started, I had 100. I hit 200, and the flow team says you can build unlimited flows. Back then, it means 200 was the limit. It's an unlimited limit. It's limit to unlimited. So when we hit that 200, when I hit that 200, I complained very bitterly, privately, but very bitterly, that how can you say 200? This is not real. Why don't you just tell people it's 200? So they bumped the limit to 250 initially, and then to 500. So and Australia got the first because I was whinging, and then, but someone else in Europe hit 500 before me. So I think the current max limit is 600. But that's someone else in Europe that did it. I don't know who. Probably someone cloning a lot of their flows. But anyway, that's a side story. So here are my 483 flows, and I've lost the scrolling thing when I went over this. Flow Studio reads all your flow up front, and then it reads all the runs. So you could do things like, let's sort by the runs, and we know immediately these flows have been running. And they are, it fetches only the first page of 50. But then from the 50, I can estimate that flow is a bit crazy. It will eat 14,000 runs this month if I don't do something about it. I should do something about it. I just haven't got around to it. I have bought Flow Premium P2 for myself just because of how much I'm using. Probably need to buy a couple of capacity as well. One of the other things it reads is the number of fails. So I know very quickly which flows in my environment has been failing. So about these 6. If you look inside this UI, there's just no way to know. You don't know what's been running. You also don't know what's been failing. In fact, if you share a flow with the team, it now moves to the team flow tab. So you have 2 tabs that you need to toggle back and forth, trying to find which flow it is. Bit tricky for me, this one. I don't know how to use. And if you click on any of these flows, it will take you right into that flow. So I build that URL and then send you right in. Okay, so that's the flow, I guess, inventory, the management screen. We build a lot of filtering, so you could say, oh, I just want the SharePoint flows. Did I click it? Yeah, there we go. So I just want the SharePoint flows. Those are my SharePoint ones. We build the spark line. So because we're already scanning the last runs, we draw these little nice green dots. You can see that one took really extra long to run that one. All the other ones are super short. If you click it, it goes into the actual runs. If you're using SharePoint trigger, common data service, email, so Outlook triggers, I try to pull out some useful columns. So, every flow is triggered with this JSON, right? So a SharePoint item usually has an ID and has some sort of title. Or if it's a file, it has an ID and some sort of file name. So I say, well, if I see a SharePoint trigger, I'm just going to service these two columns. And one of the best things you could do with this is then you could say, oh, let me filter to ID number 2, because I know there's something that happened on that list item. And then you could say fetch the latest 50, or you can even say fetch the 500. So essentially, this is the same as if you say go into this. Oh, where's my SharePoint? First, I have to find my SharePoint, which is impossible. Maybe that one. And there's no runs. Damn it. Let me come back here. Let me click into that guy. And then, so in Flow, you will see all these runs. And you don't really know which one is which item, right? Like, how do you know which one is this item 2? So you have to click into each one of them looking for it. And that's just insane. So not having that. So we build, this is our filtering based on the items. And this works for common data service, works for SharePoint, works for Outlook, so Exchange. So with Exchange, the title, I think the subject is here, and then I think the from email address is here, I think, from memory. Man, I love talking about this. I'm not sure which point I'm on already. Let me jump back. What have I done? So we've done last run. So that's sorting by last run. That's usually really helpful. If you have never looked at your flows using last run, it will tell you very quickly what's running a lot in your environment. In fact, several people tell me right away that there are flows running that they did not know that is running. Usually, if you say create a recurrence trigger, so a scheduled recurrence trigger, even for testing, the default of creating recurrence trigger, let me show you this. So if you go to flows, schedule trigger, see this repeat every 1 minute. Like why would? Or if you just start from blank and you say recurrence. Sometimes we make this and then we start testing. Compose. This is not going to do anything. But the moment I save this flow, this trigger of 1 a minute starts running in the back while I'm making this. So by the time I finish this talk, this is run 60 times, right? Oh, actually, no, this talk is 30 minutes. So this is run 30 times. So the schedule trigger is a bit runs very quickly. And sometimes it catches makers by surprise that, oh, why is my top run so high? And it's a recurrence trigger that's been running for the last 3 months, just chewing up runs, but not doing anything. So good to just check that and make sure, you use your runs on important things, not accidentally. The flow team is obviously very interested in using up all your runs as quickly as possible. So if you don't check that, that's the outcome. So do keep an eye on it. Hashtag filtering. So this is a very big complaint. As we get to lots and lots of flows, we can find out. We want to be able to group our flows. And you could get by with a naming convention, trying to name your flows a certain way. I build the hashtags instead. So each flow, we can add multiple hashtags. You could say, oh, flows that are related to Flow Studio, or flows that are related to a demo. So say a Microsoft Graph demo. It's waiting for the sparkline to pop in. Or sometimes when I do a conference, I tag several of the examples I wanted to do with that conference name, and then I just filter to that field, and that's how I present. So hashtag. So if you like metadata tags, being able to add multiple tags to group flows with them, this is that feature, and there's a multi-select of all the different tags, and you can make more. Tags can be emoji because emojis are cool, and tags can also be color. There's a rocket. I have rocket flows. I add these sparklines because I think they're really cool, but for me, actually, they slow down my UI quite a bit. But that's also because I have quite a lot of flows. So the rocket. So that's hashtag. That will help you find and group your flows quickly. Sparklines, which I showed that already. It's basically that. Runs with context, I showed that too. That's the part where we could filter and fetch additional pages of flow. Man, I rushed through this. What else do people want to see? I have one more. This one is a paid feature. You should talk to me about it, but let me show you just the screen. So the flow migrate is a new feature. This one is a pay. Currently it's still in free trial, so you should go and play with it. I'm still trying to look for more feedback around this. But basically, migrate is the idea that you want to copy one flow to a new flow, or you want to copy a flow to a different environment. So say you have a source environment that's development. Let me show you some of my ones. That picture is actually quite old, so I want to show you a new one. One sec. Let's do that one. So this is actually reading both my environments. So this default environment and also the demo environments. You could see on the left-hand side, I'm copying this same flow. This is a SharePoint file approved flow. It's the same definition, but I'm copying it across to 3 different SharePoint sites. And they're also across flow environments. So in a flow dev environment to a prod environment, the migrate wizard helps you pick up the connections that are available in the prod environment, switch out URLs, switch out variables, and then once you save the plan, you just run it, and it will basically do a copy and paste all the flows across. It does it very quickly, so it's all done. That's done. It's just refreshing the connections again. So some of the customers use this to migrate or manage 20 to 40 flows. I personally get a bit scared when people do it with 40. I'm like, can't you make it multiple plans? You could have multiple plans. You don't have to do it in one big bang, but they want it that way. But if you're in a scenario where you have a template and you need to deploy in lots of sites, or you have a bunch of dev flows and you want to copy it to prod flows, super useful. A lot of people are asking me, can I do this for PowerApps? Currently, I don't know the PowerApps API enough to do this, but I could see it's a pretty strong. It's a complicated problem. We build a Power App on a development environment, want to take it to a prod environment, and we want to switch out all the URLs, and that is just very manual. There's a lot of clicking around. So thinking about it, but yeah, that's what deploy does. So this is probably the best pay feature that's coming. What else do people want to see? Maybe I'll just ask Christians. I have no more slides. Oh, these are not slides I plan to really talk about. The Flow Studio currently has an admin section. It's under the pay area. This one reads all the flows as the admin. So if you have admin account, which I find many users don't, but if you do have an admin account, this will fetch everything in the environment. So if you're from the IT side, you want to see everybody's flows. It's similar to the main flows, but now this is reading everybody's. Anyway, let me slow down and maybe ask some questions. Is there any questions that people have, or I just went too fast? People are like,
Questions, anyone?
I'll forward on you, John. So basically for the alert side, do you have anything around alerts? So like at the flow fail, it's been running 200 times and then all of a sudden it failed. You can set a flow to send yourself email, but at the platform level, do you have any of that stuff?
right, okay. So this is the idea. This is actually a backend product I've been doing for probably the last 3 months. The idea is that Flow Studio runs in the browser, right? So if the user is not in the browser, I can't scan anything for you. So there is the work going on, and I codename it's called a Flow Studio server. So the whole idea is that in addition to the permissions, I also ask for offline, and I basically scan your environments all the time. So regardless of whether the user is in the browser or not, I will always scan the environment. And the Flow Studio server is able to pick up when flows fail. Yes, it could call your flow and start it with a JSON representing the flow that just failed. And do all that fancy stuff. So both the monitoring side to it, we could do aggregate summary emails from that. We can also do things like governance checking, like if a flow has just started and is using a connector that it really should not be using, we can abort that flow. Now, Flow API does not give me a webhook to know when flow starts, so it's very much a like when the scanning job picks it up, and maybe every 5 minutes, if it sees the flow that's doing that, it could notify. And if the flow is still running, it could terminate. But it's not a completely foolproof governance. It's not a lock. Like you could potentially have a flow that ran off before you could stop it, but at least you can notify afterwards. So there's a lot of governance idea to it. There's a lot of report as well. So report governance, monitoring, very strong on monitoring. And a lot of the data that's collected by the Flow Studio server, it covers this idea that if I read a flow and say this flow runs 50 times a week this month, that's okay. But then if next month is now the same flow is now running 400 times a week, so there is that growth, right? So it's not just scanning an individual point of time, but even the trend of a flow. Particularly, I understand flow a lot deeper to PowerApps, but I think in PowerApps there's also the thinking that you start with an app that's maybe used by 5 people, and that's okay. But then next month is scaling to 50 people, and then the next month after that is scaling to 500 people. So the trend is important, right? Like the trend of the usage, the sharing, or in the terms of flow, the number of flow runs, that trend is important. So being able to say automatically monitor snapshots of these records in time, and then being able to immediately pick it out and say, this month we think these 27 flows, just random number, are business critical because of the way they're scaling and the way they're behaving, or they're either doing some infinite loop and they've just gone into a crazy loop and they're not going to stop, or maybe the scale of the applications being rolled out. So this flow should be business critical. So there's that idea as well. So this is more the Flow Studio server backend piece. One of the other things that the server can do, because it runs backend all the time, is it could do full-time backup of any flow definitions. Because it's basically scanning a whole bunch of things. As soon as it sees a new flow, it could back up that definition. Flow Studio has limited backup. The browser app, it could back up, but it could only back up when you log in. So if you don't log into Flow Studio, you can't do that backup to local storage for you. Yeah, sorry, long-winded answer, but yeah, if you're if you're thinking of flow fail monitoring, the server product is the one where I'm putting in more work into that. It's basically
Sorry,
yeah.
Sorry. So what's your ETA on that?
Sorry, ET, what's that?
Yeah, when are you planning to release it?
When am I going to release a server? Well, in my head. So this is also tied to why I kept. This is actually tied to. I wanted to be visiting Perth. But next week we have a SharePoint conference in Sydney, and then end of the month we have one in Melbourne. So my idea was to have a prototype at least ready by next week. So right after this, I'll go back to coding, I suppose. But yeah, sorry, yeah.
Sorry, literally we had a meeting this morning to discuss the governance about all the flows. And Spark popped up saying, okay, how can I manage our flows going forwards? And plus, if all the business users will start creating flows, how do we manage them?
Yeah.
And we thought about using your studio, which definitely will give us some insight. But
Yes.
I think the server one is definitely the one we'd like to have. So, yeah, is that, I know you said next week for prototype.
Next week is my demo. It's probably not a full multi-tenant solution.
Yeah. So I'm trying to understand. So how is that going to integrate with your Flow Studio and Flow Server? And do we need to buy different licenses for it?
Right. So Flow Studio Server is my thinking name. I think it's more an IT. It's a more company-based solution. So Flow Studio app itself is very much a focus on the maker. I currently don't have an idea around pricing. We should talk. We should talk about pricing.
Yeah, no, right.
Kush, I'll get the details to John and the deal we can start after.
I'm looking for pilot companies.
More
Just
than
like
happy to put our hand up for that.
Yeah.
You've got one volunteer.
Yay! And I noticed Martin is in the room, right? Martin's in the front.
Yeah.
And Flow Studio actually can read logic apps. I haven't built it. But imagine a mixed company where you have flows and then you have logic apps as well, and you want to see them all together. Flow Studio can actually see that.
Nice.
And because logic apps and flow are very similar in terms of API, the way the runs, the way the ownerships work, they could work here. You wouldn't have environments in logic apps. You will have the Azure subscription groups as well. But in terms of the API, they are like 85% the same. The main difference is the environments versus the subscription group. So there is some thinking around that. Like in a large enterprise company where your IT is thinking, well, why do we have two sets of, why do we have some logic apps here and some flow here? Can we monitor them together? Can we get a webhook when logic apps or flow fail and feed that back into our IT support system and track that as a kind of an urgent event? They are all ideas floating around. I have far more ideas than I know what to do with. It's just crazy ideas.
We should have a chat then.
Sorry?
Have a chat.
We should have a chat.
Around logic apps. So.
I'm gonna ask Terry to help me collect the email addresses. I can't see your faces, so I'm not mapping very well who's having chat with what. I will chat with everybody. Just everybody chat with me.
John, can I ask another question? Are you showing this filtered by environments, where you've got your default versus your corporate environments?
Okay, so Flow Studio is filtered only to it. When Flow Studio was built, it's very much similar to how the Flow portal is built. I think you pick your environment first. So Flow Studio does it like this. The Flow governance portal does not filter by environment. It shows you everything at the same time. So the Flow Studio server has a more lightweight UI to it that helps you kind of see everything. That one is cross environment by default. Flow Studio app, the one designed for Maker, when it was built, it's filtered top level at the environment level. Does that help? That's one of the things I was thinking about. This is this admin. This is just kind of some idea and product feedback. The Flow Studio app is really designed for the Maker, and this admin I find is super useful if you're IT, but very few percentage of my users can actually use this. They don't have the right permission. So what I'm thinking is this tab is, I will change this tab. Basically, it will use whatever permission you have. If you have admin, it will use that. If you don't, it will do a similar thing to the base flow. So it will work for any service account. But the page basically lets you save different fields. So if you want to do a SharePoint one, and then you, like in SharePoint, right? You could say, oh, okay, this filter result, I like this. You save this, and then this appears as like a sub tab here, right? So you can save multiple different field settings, maybe, and maybe we could put some alerts and put big numbers here, like flows that we think are running infinitely, flows that are running over 2,000 times a month, and we'll put a number right here that says, you know, oh, it's too busy, it's gone to sleep. We'll put a number right here that says there are 3 flows that looks pretty dire. You should probably have a look at them. Something like that. But that was my thinking around this admin. That will make it more useful for more people. Right now, it uses a permission that very few people have. Anyway.
Can I ask a question? Can the admin go in and delete one of my flows?
Sorry, can an admin go in and delete? I think my page is hanged. Let me just click away. Sorry, can an admin go into
And delete one of my flows? So the
can an
doesn't know
admin
what
delete your flow? No, not on that UI. I haven't built it. I believe it's on the API though. So some of the things that the admin should be able to do is you should be able to right click on other people's flows and then say take it over or assign a service account to it. There are also more reports that we need, such as, you know, when a service account is added to a flow, the admin should be able to see whether it's still using that individual's connection or is it using the service account's connection, right? That's kind of important. Because there's no point I take over John, like as the admin, I take over John's flow, and then it's still using John's connection. Like, that's not what I want. I wanted to switch over and use the service account connection. So yeah, what's going on? It's just decided to go to sleep. Let me close that tab. I think there's just too much stuff. I need to fix it before my users all have 500 flows. Then they come and complain and say, John, your UI keeps freezing.
John,
Yes.
I got a couple of questions.
Yep.
First one is, what's this built in? I'm just curious.
JavaScript.
Okay. Any particular framework?
Angular.
Okay.
Angular, Microsoft MSAL, so Microsoft Authentication Library.
Okay.
Angular. I'm using Telerik controls. They're just a quick way to do fancy GUIDs and load these grids. Yeah.
And my second question is, regarding all this information that you're showing up on the screen, do you store any of this, or is it just in time display? There's no caching or no storage of this information?
Oh, there's crazy. Let me show you how that look like. You want to talk geeky stuff? I can talk geeky stuff all day. It's here. So we use the browser index DB. How much JSON can I throw at people, Terry? We use the browser index DB heavily to store as much stuff as we can. But yeah, it's all hiding in here. Okay. The code name is called Kunai. That's why it's that.
Okay.
There was some. Oh yeah, there's this fancy thing. Fancy thing. I have a geofence one. I have a Pokemon Go flow. It takes 3 locations in the park outside my home randomly. And when I arrive at that location, this flow will trigger because the geofence trigger. And then when it triggers, it will pick one of the other random locations, modify itself to trigger on the other point, and then send me a notification. It's like a self-mutating flow. Every time I arrive there, it moves a point somewhere else. And I just have to run around the park to collect Pokemons, I guess. It's a fancy. I wrote these silly flows, and this one because
Yes, you can.
yeah, just because I can.
Yeah, exactly.
This is John.
And hey, I hope to meet you guys soon. And one of the things so Flow does not let you add the JSON directly. In Flow Studio, in the pay feature, you could just add the JSON, and that will take you to the JSON. So in the old days, you could do find replace here quite quickly. If you have a PowerApps trigger and you really dislike how the parameters are named, you can use this to fix it up. Just make sure the references are correct. I think Martin in the front looking at the thinking, this is all in Logic Apps. Why do you need to build this? But anyway, Logic Apps has added JSON, Flow doesn't. So we need this. Yeah.
The right tool for the job, right? So.
Yes. Yeah.
Any other questions?
I got one more. So John, for the migrate feature, right, you can do different environments under the same tenant. You hop between.
Yes, under the tenant. No, I can't do a cross tenant yet. I have been thinking about it. I'm not sure how to do it easily. I have also been thinking about, so migrate has a few use cases if you think about the Flow Studio server scenario, right? Like, let me show you what migrate plan looks like. Is there a way to? And migrate plan basically is a big JSON that gets built. So a plan has an item, multiple flows. This is the flow environments. And then within the flow, whether I change connections, whether I switch out variables. Sorry, lost breath. But basically, it's a massive JSON on how you are mapping your source to destination, like one to many or many to many. I've been thinking that this could run on the server, right? Like you don't need to. This code could all be lifted and moved into the server side, and then you could link it up quite nicely with an ALM process where you say, you know, when we check in or when we decide to make a release, we're going to call an API, and the API is going to run this mapping and basically do all the migration. So there's some thinking around that. And because the Flow Studio app is designed for one maker, there is no multi-tenancy support in this app. Whereas the Flow Studio server is designed to be multi-tenant from the beginning. So there's some thinking that maybe that's the better place to put that particular feature, just because it's got more pieces, it's got more building blocks in place to do that bit. You know what I mean? Yeah.
You definitely need to prep it before you can migrate it, right? You have to grant all the permission, all that stuff.
Yeah. So one way may be that you use export to just shift it into a dev environment in your production tenant, and then use migrate in the production tenant to help you fix up all the connections. So that is one way. It's kind of a two-step thing rather than a one-step thing. But it's mainly because this Flow Studio app only tracks one user. It doesn't know about the other user. Not easy to fix that problem. Yeah.
John, I've got a non-nerdy question.
Sure.
Okay, so
What do you mean? These are all not nerdy. Oh, I have a super nerdy example. I'll do it after your non-nerdy question.
Okay, so my scenario is I've got various PowerApps and the associated flows with them. So do you have a way for me to identify which flows belong to which apps?
No, because I don't read the Power App.
At all?
You could see the Power Apps by filtering. But no, because Flow and Power Apps are Flow and Power Apps are kind of separate, right? Like the flows that have a Power Apps trigger. Let me kill this filter, and let me show you the Power Apps trigger. You'll be surprised. I have very little Power Apps triggers. Where are they? Over here. Oh, missed it. Yeah. This is the sparkline fighting me because it's trying to re-render the sparkline. So it's on a busy day, it gets damn it. I built Flow Studio and I realized that a HTTP request, a button, and a Power App request, they're all the same thing. Geofence is the same trigger. There's that one, Power Apps. So from the Flow side, there are no information on which Power Apps is calling this flow. And it's kind of the idea that multiple Power Apps could call the same flow. So to read that particular reference, we have to read the Power App side. Like we have to read the definition of the Power App to see which flows it's referencing. That's not something that Flow Studio reads. Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry. I need to spend some time and study the Power Apps API to figure it out. I think it should be in there because to the Power App, the flow is an additional connection, right? So if you read the Power App and say, give me a list of all the connections you're calling, it probably has a reference to whatever the flow GUI is here. Yeah.
I think from the
but
headers,
right? Huh?
I think from the headers.
Yeah. But essentially what Terry is asking is, can we add Power Apps here, like, right under here?
And do my
Power Platform Studio, done.
Okay, so what's your nerdy scenario,
okay, this
John?
is super nerdy.
Are we ready for it though?
I was born ready.
Yeah, but you're a nerd.
And I'm still ready now. So.
Let me think about it. Let me think. I need a flow that I might not have one. Wait, hold on. I need something that has a loop.
With the Power Apps, they're looking to parameterize the environments anyway, so that effectively you just move your app between environment and change your environment variable, and it just moves across. So they are looking at how they simplify that.
Yes, yes. The solutions that are the way the Power Platform teams think about this is they think, okay, the app and the flows in it should go into a solution, and then in the solution you can define an additional entity called a environment variable. I'll show you what that might look like. So in the solution here, do I have one? I hope I have some solutions. So this is a solution of a bunch of my flows. In here, see, you can add environment variable. Now, this actually doesn't work right now. Like, I don't know how this UI snuck into prod environments, but this particular thing doesn't work right now. So you could go and make this and it will do absolutely nothing. But the whole idea is that you can define these environment variables. They live inside a solution. And then in the future, from both the Power App and the flow, you can reference these environment variables. And then as you're doing that cross-tenant scenario, or if you're selling your solutions through the app source, then when someone installs it, they set the solution variables in one place, and then both the PowerApps and the flow will use the solutions. It kind of makes sense.
Yeah.
That's kind of the idea. The migrate tackles a slightly different problem that's not covered. Migrate covers the one-to-many scenario. This does not cover one-to-many. Like you can't say I have one flow and I want to make 20 copies of it, all with different variables, values. You can't do it with this. So it's kind of a gap that they didn't build. I built migrate after I realized what they're doing with solutions. And then I checked with the team. I actually asked them, I want to build this. Is this something you're tackling? They say no. So I went and built it. Super nerdy example. So I need to get better at this particular nerdy example. But sometimes you have I don't know whether this one has it. Get flows. Yeah, no, I don't have it in here. But sometimes in a flow, you have an apply to each. And within the apply to each, say you are inserting new records to SharePoint, say. So in Flow Studio, if you go into runs, and then if you go into one of the run, it will be a nicer demo if it was a fair one. For each run, you can list run actions. And this is where I say Flow Studio goes about 5 levels deeper. Like we can read all the actions that are in your flow, and then we can read the input and output of them. So if you have an apply to each, and then say there's like 100 insert to SharePoint, and this action takes 20 minutes, you can click this link, and this link takes you back to the flow designer. And sometimes you might have seen similar things like this. If you have an action within flow and the data that's returned is way too big, you get a link, and if you click it, you get to this massive JSON screen, right? So what you do is this JSON string, this one is just one action, but if you're inside an array, inside a for each loop, this becomes an array of responses from flow. And what you can then do is let me come back here, cancel this. This is one example. I actually work on this with Paul. So I'll try very careful not to show anything secret. But you take the JSON. So imagine this massive JSON array, completely unreadable by humans. But Power BI is pretty good at parsing JSON. So you add the JSON as a data source. I pick out the SharePoint. This is the flow. This is the action name. That's the SharePoint input body title. So that's the title of 162 rows. The start and end time of each connection. The output headers, SharePoint health score that ranges between 0 and 9. I don't know what else. Couple of things. If it's successful, so success or failed in this column. But basically, flatten the JSON. It's a nested JSON. Flatten that into Power BI. Get this little table, and then plot it into a Gantt chart. And you see this. This is the nerdiest thing I've ever seen. I don't even know how to sell it. I'm just gonna. So this is 162 calls to SharePoint from one flow. It ran over 20 minutes. And there are these gaps where Flow just went to sleep. I don't know what it's doing. It just decided to do a bunch of work and then slack off, have a coffee, and then come back and do 5. And then I have no idea what it's doing actually. But imagine like if you hit a browser F12 and you can see the network kind of progress bar. This is like that, except this is completely server side, right? This is what's happening inside the Flow engine as it's calling your SharePoint. See the health score there, there's 1. SharePoint health score gets from 0 to 10. If you're not up to 7, you're not really in trouble. So SharePoint is actually okay. It's not particularly upset. Yeah, anyway, I just find this thing super geeky. So this is one action. And what I was thinking is, if we merge all the actions together into one massive array, and then we color code them based on the action. So you can say, oh, here's green, it's talking to SharePoint, and then a bunch of reds is talking to, you know, CDS, and then a bunch of Excel. So let's do that blue. I'm getting all this color completely wrong, violating Microsoft branding guidelines. But I think that chart is super interesting. Like you could see minute by minute. I don't think Flow is doing nothing here. I think it's being really busy calling some other API here. But because I'm only looking at one action, I don't have, it just looks like it's sleeping. But I thought the merged array, this, like if you think this array is not readable, wait till you see the bigger one. I thought that would be super nerdy. Anyway, I look at this and I go, where do I stick it? Where do I stick this into Flow Studio? It's like about 4 levels deep, and you got to click that. But if you have a flow that's running super slow, and you wanted to just kind of get some visual of it, or maybe it failed. Actually, one of the scenarios I helped someone recently is you loop over 150 items and 2 items failed, and you're just struggling to find which 2 items there are. Come here and do the export, and then just find failed in that big array. You'll get there a lot quicker. So that's a power tip for people. Anyway, super geeky. I probably should stop. It's just everybody's like
John,
eyes glazed over.
John, it's 1 o'clock at the moment. Just wondering if anyone's got any last questions for John before we break? No? That's it? Okay.
Awesome, John. Thanks
John,
very much.
thank you so much. We'll catch you next time.
See you in Perth next time.
I'll have a chat with you later. Thanks.
Yeah,
John.
we need to work out when, but soon, yes.
Yes.
There, John.
Bye.